Hi, I'm Beck and welcome to my May wrap up. These are all of the books I both finished and put down during the month of May. So let's get into talking about them because there's such a mixed bag. So first of all, I want to talk about some manga volumes that I borrowed from my library, and that would be Ragnar Crimson volumes 1 and 2. Now this series follows obviously Ragnar. He is the character in the title, and at the beginning of the story he's very weak and he's following around his mentor, and this mentor is a prodigy and she's like 12 years old or something, and in this world they fight dragons which are akin to demons. You need silver to kill them, and so Ragnar's mission is to become powerful and be able to fight dragons like his mentor. There's a shift halfway through the first volume and Ragnar comes into power, and now he's got to figure out what to do with this power, and that's where the series continues. So in the second volume it's very much focusing on Ragnar and his choices, and then it's also developing a character that is newly introduced in volume 2, and they go on this journey together but they can't really trust each other, and now Ragnar wants to kill all of dragonkind. And at the end of each line of hierarchical dragons there is a dragon monarch, so it's kind of like working your way up to the most powerful to then wipe out the family line. So Ragnar is like, I'm gonna kill all of them, and this other character's like, we'll see about that. I like Ragnar's strength and I like his determination, and I also like the other character that's been introduced because they are strategic and intelligent and they've got a lot of knowledge about dragons. So I like how those two play off each other and how there's an element of distrust in there because they do work together but they don't really know each other very well. So between all of the setting up of this series, I actually really like the premise and I like where it's going. So I did continue on with the rest of the series, but not until a bit later. So I'll talk about the third volume a bit later, and I also have some volumes on my TBR cart behind me. So I'm obviously going to continue this series. It's a manga that I'm really enjoying, and I gave both volumes 1 and 2 of Ragnar Crimson a 4-star rating each. But then I started a book that will probably be a bit more familiar to people because it's an Emily Henry title, and that is Great Big Beautiful Life. And I've had a bit of a mixed bag with Emily Henry. I've loved some of her stuff like Beach Read and Funny Story, and then I really disliked some of her other stuff. So this one fell on the like low 3-star scale because I just did not like Alice as a main character. So we're following Alice and Hayden, and both of them go to this not deserted island but a remote island, and they're going to pursue this movie star. She's changed her name, she's moved there, and they want her life story. And because both of them are competing for this life story, she makes both of them sign an NDA for a month, and then at the end of that month she's going to decide who officially has the job. And then on this small island they only really know each other because they've both gone ahead for their dream jobs. So because of that they start to bump into each other everywhere and they start to form this relationship, and it's like a relationship that they're both denying is happening because they're like, oh well, we shouldn't really start anything because what if the month-long deadline then reveals who has the job and we can't deal with that. And yet they get into a relationship anyway without discussing the fact that they live in separate states usually, and this job might throw a spanner in the works. So it's just a bit haphazard. It felt like this story really rushed the feelings of I love you, and the intimacy didn't feel quite right. I don't know exactly why I felt that way, but I guess I just didn't really like Alice that much. Instead of acknowledging things, she would very much retreat into herself and just deny them and then continue on the path that she was forging, and that got very tiresome in terms of processing her emotions. And as a reader I'm like, I want actual interaction to be meaningful, and that kind of bypassed it for me. I actually liked Hayden, the love interest, much more than Alice, and I wish it was a story about him instead of her. But surprisingly, the ending, you know how there's usually a third act breakup in a romance to like increase the hype and tension and then they'll get together officially? I actually really bought the third act breakup in this, so it wasn't all lost. Not all hope was lost, and I found it quite emotive and believable. So there was a little bit that clawed itself back, but for the most part I was not really enamored by this book at all. So it's a very low 3 stars for me, and I'm now not really sure where I sit with Emily Henry, unfortunately. I anticipated anticipated that that book would be like a 4 or 5 star read. So the fact that it was so low made me go, okay, maybe I need to do a hard pivot into a different genre to hopefully boost my reading and not fall into a slump. And then that didn't really work because I started a sci-fi book called A Half-Built Garden and I borrowed it from the library, so I don't have it on me anymore. And I ended up DNFing this one, but the premise sounded spectacular, and it follows Jodie and her wife and their daughter Dory, and one day they run into this alien spaceship. So it's a first contact with aliens story, and the aliens refuse to talk to anyone else and only Jodie because they met her first and she has a newborn. So because of that, Earth is like, well, okay, now we need to figure out all the politics between these new aliens because they're wanting us as a human species to evacuate Earth because there is a climate crisis. It's the year 2080. And they're like, this is the first planet that we've come across in time that we can save. So you need to evacuate. So it's about handling those politics. And there's also been striving forward in terms of scientific development. So they are beginning to save the climate and they don't want to give up on Earth. And also people see it as home. So it's probably going to deal with a lot of interesting themes, but I just found the writing was really boring. I was reading through it and then getting distracted and not wanting to go back to it and just thinking, this is not gripping me at all. So yeah, it was a bit disappointing given the premise sounded great. It was like a Becky Chambers adjacent story in terms of trying to build up those characters and have that as a focus of the story, so character-led sci-fi. And I love Becky Chambers, so any comparative to her, I'm more than willing to give a go. But this one was just not it, so I had to put it down at like 46 pages. Then we come back to Ragnar Crimson. I read volume 3 and I also gave it a 4 stars, and this is when Ragnar and a series of other characters have come to this city where people keep disappearing and they end up needing to go up against a dragon monarch, and this dragon monarch has the ability to stop time. So it's not like it's going to be an easy fight. In my opinion, there was a fight sequence that absolutely lifted the whole volume. It was quite epic, and there was also moments of humor in this in terms of timing because there is a slime character and there were a couple of panels that just laid out what he was doing in a very simple manner that made me cackle. There was also a chapter at the very, very end of this volume that I really liked, and it was sad and yet determined, so it had that emotion to it. So overall, like I said, this is hitting really well and I'm really liking everything so far about this new series I've started. But then we get into a book that I also DNF'd. So I gave the first binding 91 pages because that is the page that ended on a chapter, and I thought this would be a new epic fantasy following this character in a red cloak because this cover looks cool. Like honestly, it looks awesome. So this character is called Storyteller, and at the beginning of the story he's in a tavern and he's weaving this story to all of the people in the tavern with him, and he's using magic to kind of infuse his storytelling. Then he just doesn't really describe why, and I thought it would be a similar premise to Name of the Wind in the sense that he's in a tavern and he's recounting his life story, and then it will get into his life story and why he's, on his own, what he's done in the past, what legends are linked to him. And I like that setup, I like that premise, but it really didn't go that way, unfortunately. And I talked about this in 2 separate vlogs. So in one vlog I gave my initial first impressions after reading the first 30 pages, and then I gave my concluding impressions when I finished chapter whatever it was at 90 pages. So I was like, I really wanted to like this, but again, the writing was just so drab to me. The intellect and intent of this character, so also the why of what he was doing, was intriguing to me. I wanted to know what was going on and why he was in this place, like what he was doing, but it didn't really get to the point of what his actual story might entail until more than 80 pages in, when he found this random woman who decided to travel with him for no particular reason on her part either, and he then decides to tell his whole story to her after she kind of guesses about who he might be. And it didn't really make enough traction and sense for him to do that, and I also just did not buy their connection because it felt very coy and like every part of their conversation was stepping around something, so it also didn't feel grounded, and I just did not like the character work that this author was trying to set up. There was a moment where he was quoting all of the things that he'd done, and it was supposed to sound like mysterious and epic, but I was reading it and I was like, this just sounds like posturing, and I'm not buying it. So unfortunately, I ended up putting this down, and I wanted this to be a new epic fantasy that I really enjoyed. But alas, sometimes we just have hopes and then we try them and it doesn't work. I did read the first page in the bookstore and I thought, oh, this might appeal to me, but I didn't realize that the premise of him being at the tavern would take so long and the writing would be so unintentional and just describe a whole bunch of stuff instead of getting to the point. I don't mind a bit of floweriness and description, but it just felt like this was missing the mark. So it's off my TBR. I don't need to worry about reading 900 pages. Thankfully though, I did manage to read an epic grimdark fantasy, and you can probably guess it is The Devils by Joe Abercrombie, and I ended up really enjoying this one and gave it 4 stars. And this one follows an eclectic mix of characters. Mostly it centers Brother Diaz at the beginning, and he's a priest and he's been sent to this conclave, and in this world the religion is run by women, so the god is a goddess and the pope is a woman as well, and the pope sends Brother Diaz and a bunch of other eclectic characters called the Devils on this mission to transport a lost princess to the throne in order to mend some politics. And that's the crux of the story. Alex, or Princess Alexia, is the name of the princess, and she's just a street urchin. She's found by Duke Michael, and she's identified by the half-coin necklace that she's wearing and a birthmark on her neck. And that's how they know she's the princess. She was taken at birth, and they're like, well, we need to retrain her on the road and then put her on the throne. And while they are traveling, they need to avoid the sons of the empress because she wants the throne for herself. So they get attacked periodically while they're on their travels too. Some of the other characters include Jakob, who is a scarred knight, and the description that Brother Diaz gives is it looks like he's fallen down a mountain because his face is that scarred. He's also got a bit of a trick up his sleeve. He's not any ordinary knight, and I quite liked that and how it was revealed. So I don't want to say exactly what it was because finding out in the first fight scene was part of the fun. There is Balthazar. He's a magician, but he keeps being labelled as a sorcerer and that ticks him off. And he's very particular and driven, and at the start of the story, all of them are marked. So spell work is put on them and it forces them to have to protect Alexia. So because that is forcing them together, they form a reluctant, unwilling found family. So it's kind of a play on the found family trope, but it's making it a bit more gritty and gruesome because they're forced to work together. So they do form some kind of bond and unity, but not really any that they would sacrifice their lives for each other for. So it is an interesting dynamic, and I really like how that played out in all of the different characters. Usually with Joe Abercrombie, I would struggle to follow and understand and like all of them because in his past books I've liked 1 or 2 characters in The Blade itself, for example, and not really been interested in the others. But it felt like in this story I was interested in all of them, and that's pretty impressive given that there were 6 or 7 leading characters. Some of the others that are worth mentioning are Sunny, who is an elf, and then also Baron Rickard, who is a vampire. We've got Vera, who is a werewolf. So like I said, it is quite a mix, and they're all very different characters with very different objectives. And something that I liked in this book that Joe Abercrombie's not done in his others is he tends to write sex scenes and they're very gruesome and not very pleasant to read. It's very intentional that it's done that way, but I just don't like reading about it. And in this story, all of them were fade to black, and I was like, thank God. So he's very much learned his lesson, and I'm very much a fan of that. So that contributed to my enjoyment of this book because I was really worried that it would be so gross that it would gross me out. And don't get me wrong, there is grossness in this book quite significantly, but it was doable compared to what his other works have been like. So again, it was a 4 stars. I feel like there was a bit at the end where it started to drag a little and it felt like the characters were safe, but you know that there's still some book left, so their safety is actually a farce. So that was a little bit of a lull. It went on a little bit longer than I hoped it would, but when it picked up again, boy, it picked up. So I really enjoyed myself in this book. I actually couldn't put it down. I was finding reasons to listen to it. So the audiobook was fantastic as well. I just had a good time, and I think it ended in a very satisfying way. It could honestly be picked up later, but it felt very much concluding enough that I don't feel like I need more of it. So it was a very satisfying, contained story, and I really enjoyed it. After a grim, dark fantasy, I needed a little bit of hope in my life though, so I started Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez, and Part of Your World I gave 5 stars. This is the sequel to that book, and it follows the best friend from book 1. And the best friend is named Brianna, and she is a doctor at this hospital. She's been there for 10 years and she's expecting a promotion very shortly. And then a new doctor comes into the scene, and his name is Jacob, and he's also put up for this promotion, and he doesn't have any understanding of this. He just wanted to move away from his old hospital because him and his ex-girlfriend broke up, and now his ex-girlfriend is dating his brother, and they are about to get engaged and married. And Jacob is not processing any of this very well, and so he moves away from the hospital that they work at into this new one, hoping to kind of start fresh. And Brianna doesn't know any of this. Jacob also has very intense anxiety and social anxiety, so he really struggles in situations to explain exactly what he thinks, and he might just skip a few steps in his head and then get to the point, and that makes the delivery look very blunt and also unfeeling, when actually there's a lot of feeling going into it and he just can't explain how. So their beginnings of getting to know each other was quite rocky, and I thought, oh, this is a good accidental rivals to romance story. I'm very much invested because it builds up both of them very well in terms of their character, and I really found that they had such foundations, because obviously Jacob is trying to start fresh. He's got this family drama. He's got anxiety. So he was very fully formed to me. And then Brianna also has her own struggle because her brother has been diagnosed with kidney failure and he's not found a donor yet. And so at a certain point in the book, there is an anonymous donor, and that lifts a lot of Brianna's hope. But at the start of the story, she's not doing very well either. So between both of these leading characters, they just have really crappy days and they take it out on each other without meaning to. And then they realize that they need to apologize to each other, and Jacob can't do that easily verbally in person, so he ends up writing her a letter. And after that letter, she then goes, oh, I fully understand what is going on now and I feel terrible. I'm going to write him back. So they start writing letters to each other, and then on their off days from work, they start hanging out and going on dates. And I just found them so wholesome. I actually finished this book in one day. I sat on my couch and thought, oh yeah, I'm going to start listening to it, and then I just didn't stop. And I cried at this book. I teared up in some parts as well. There was a little bit of deliberate not talking to each other, but usually I would get really frustrated at that because it felt very surface in other books, but in this book they didn't talk to each other from such a raw point of vulnerability that I thought, okay, it's an annoying trope, but in this book I feel like it's very grounded and done well for once, so it wasn't a gripe that I found ruined the book for me. And Brianna also has a checkered history with men in her life. Her father left her, and her partner that she was married to for 12 years has been cheating on her for 2, so she's just finalized her divorce. So she's got a deep mistrust of male figures in her life, and that really fed into her relationship with Jacob when things were starting to get good. She was like, well, how do I know that he isn't going to cheat on me and do X, Y, and Z? So it was a bit of a balance of mental health as well, and I really just enjoyed their character work and their intimacy and their connection. It was so cute, but so well executed. I obviously gave this one a 5 stars and I loved it. Then New South Books, the publisher, sent me a book to read, and it is a sci-fi called Of Monsters and Mainframes. And I read this mostly in a vlog, so I will link that for you. Obviously it's got no spoilers, but you can see all of my updates at different points in the story. And this one follows Demeter. She is a spaceship, and at the start of the story, her whole crew gets killed by Dracula, and she is like, how do I have the protocol to stop this happening again? So she's very much an AI that is starting to develop her own sense of self and personality from her different experiences. And she's also got another AI on board that's a medical AI in the medical wing called Steward. And so they have a bit of back and forth banter. I like how this discusses AI at the beginning of the story. It also had a bit of a repetition in the sense of there's a crew, there's a series of unfortunate events, there are deaths, and then she gets powered down for a while. So it felt like it was going through a bit of a rinse and repeat for the first third or maybe half of the book. But then in the second half of the book, we actually get a bit more oomph and a bit more direction in the plot, in the sense that things are being actively pursued, and she's got passengers that are her allies, and I really liked that. So it added a new dynamic, and I like how it managed to capture her tone of voice as an AI, but also make it personable enough that you could connect to her as a character. It's a very fine line to walk, and I think it was pulled off quite well in here. That said, with some of the other characters in the story, it felt like they were built up in a way that you understood how they were very uniquely different, and I really enjoyed that. But in terms of working together, because it's kind of a ragtag crew situation, again, they're all thrown together because of their various goals rather than because they care about each other. So it wasn't really a found family story. It was just a crew that is united for a purpose, not really getting those deep foundational connections. So I ended up giving this a 3.5 stars and I enjoyed myself, but it wasn't a new favorite because it just didn't quite pull off those tropes the way I personally love them to be done. But it was convincing and I enjoyed it, and it had a decent amount of pacing that kept things moving, especially in the second half. One of the only things I didn't like though was a side character had a romance seemingly randomly with another character, and it didn't feel like it was prefaced or set up at all, except when this one character saw a picture of this love interest and was like, oh, she's really pretty. Like, that was it. Otherwise, it wasn't built up at all. So I didn't really buy that, which was unfortunate, but the rest of the story was convincing, and I liked how this AI and the programming got around being able to protect people, and I really enjoyed that aspect. So this was a fun book and I would encourage you to read it. It comes out, I think, on the 3rd of June, so I got it a little bit early and I'm very glad that I finished it. Now, the last couple, I've talked all about them in a recent reading vlog where I tried a bunch of cozy fantasies in rapid succession in the hopes that I would find something that I really, really enjoyed, but it feels like that vlog was very much a failed experiment. So I tried reading A Pirate's Life for Tea and I ended up DNFing this one at 160 pages, and this was because the writing was just not gripping me at all. And at points of development, Raina and Kianth from the first book, they were obviously featuring in this book too, they just felt very immature, and obviously they're adults. It made me pull back from wanting to be involved in the story. So what they're doing in this book is they are going on a quest to find lost dragon eggs, and they go to a neighboring town, and in this town they are being attacked by pirates, or not even attacked, but the pirates are taking grain and food and then redistributing it to places that it needs to be distributed to, because the ruling noble in this particular part of the world or this town is not doing his job properly. So it's almost like a Robin Hood but a pirate situation. So I liked that dynamic, but I just didn't like the way that this was being executed, and there were cheesy puns in here all the way through. It made it feel like it's not being taken seriously, and there were some good discussions of Raina and Kianth and their relationship and how it's progressing forward, but it felt like everything came to a halt and then they'd have that conversation and then everything would pick back up again, and it would be in a very different tone. So it just did not feel well placed. So for that reason, I ended up putting it down. It was just a bit bland for me. I then borrowed The Baker and the Bard from my library, and this is a graphic novel following Juniper and Hadley, and both of them work at a bakery, and one day a client comes in and requests these particular pastries, so they have to go to the next town over to get these glowing mushrooms from a forest in order to facilitate this client's order. And while they're on their way, they end up meeting a fae in a nearby town, and this fae says, look, I've got problems with the land and the people in the town. And so they end up getting caught up in solving this issue between the fae and the people and uniting a bunch of people, and then also having a very present and forward discussion about one of the characters being non-binary, and then what friendship is, and then what friends to lovers is. But it felt like it was very clearly signposted in an almost lesson way, like, this is what being non-binary is, this is what friendship is, and it just felt like I was being explained to rather than shown a story. And I guess, like I said in my vlog, it is a teenage audience that this is written for, but at the same time, teenagers aren't stupid. Like, if they feel preached to, they won't listen, and I feel very much the same way. If you're going to tell me how a story is instead of just showing me the story, then I wasn't very enamored, and I feel like it could have actually been longer and it would have had a bit more of an effect on me, but also because it was short, it felt quite fleeting. So I ended up giving it a 3 stars, but it was a lower 3 stars. And I think it was simple and it was cute, but it wasn't memorable for me at all. I then tried another audiobook in the vain hope that I would like a cozy fantasy, because this had decent promise. This is 2 authors collaborating to write an adult book, and it is homegrown magic. And this one follows Yale and Margot. So Yale is a noble, and they don't want the responsibility of having to marry and keep continuing their family line with heirs and just keep perpetuating the cycle, because they want something more meaningful to do with their life. So one night at a party, they steal a horse and run away, and they run away to the town of Brightfall, I think it's called, and that is where Margot lives. And they used to be friends when they were 12. They've since gone separate ways just because of the distance. And when she was 17, Margot actually wanted to reach out and invite Yale to a ball because she had a crush on Yale when they were kids but never did anything about it. So Yale now arrives in town, goes to the local tavern and runs into Margot. And Margot is there because she's caught up with a friend for dinner and then stayed on after the friend left, and she's had a few more ales because she's really struggling to reconcile her life at the moment. She's struggling with the debt that her grandma left her. So she left her this whole farm, and Margot is really struggling to run it by herself. And yet if she doesn't try and run it and make a profit and then create this potion that this contract stipulates she must do, she's going to lose the farm in 4 years. And that 4 years of time has very much progressed, so she's only got 6 months left. And the people who have owned the land and the contract that Margot must live up to are Yale's parents, the Clawnicks. So Yale doesn't know anything about this particular deal, and Margot doesn't tell Yale about this deal. Yale has studied arcana and law at school, and at the start of the story I thought, okay, it's going to be a rekindled second chance romance almost, in a sense, because they were kids when they had crushes on each other, and they're going to talk about the simplicity of life and growing your own produce. It's going to be really nice and cozy and very productive. It's a nice vibe that I can get behind, and that's what I liked about the story. But at the start, it very much set up both Yale's issue of not being supported and accepted by family, and then Margot's issue of needing legal support and needing to save all of her assets. And none of this was discussed at the start, even though it was set up at the start. So it was very clearly signposted and then only got addressed in the third act when Margot was like, I should tell Yale the whole truth. And to me, that ruined the story a bit, because if these characters had been working together towards that goal the entire way, I think it would have developed a bit more intimacy and vulnerability with them as a couple rather than as separate entities. And then there was a big delay in them getting together at the very end. And it feels like all of that conflict could have somewhat been avoided, which is maybe why the author went down this path instead. But I just did not like the way that it landed. So that was a bit disappointing. The connection between Margot and Yale was cute, but then I looked at it again through the lens of Margot not telling everything to Yale and Yale not sharing their vulnerabilities with Margot, and I thought, this is built on a friendship that you used to have, but it's also built on a lie because Margot isn't telling you everything. So I gave it a low 3 stars as well. Lots of low 3 stars in this video, unfortunately. I just wanted a good book and I wasn't finding them. So this was just, disappointing, and I wish that it hit hard. I love cozy fantasy usually, but it was just not working for me at the end of May, which is very frustrating. Additionally, and the last book I'm going to talk about is A Fellowship of Bakers and Magic, which is the last cozy fantasy book that I tried and it didn't work for me either. And this one follows Aletta, and she is an amazing baker, but she's human and therefore not magical. And if you're not magical in this particular world, then people are very prejudiced against you, which is very harsh. So it's like this world's form of racism, essentially. And she is trying to get into the market every week that she bakes all her goods for, and she's always charged a higher price and given a crappy spot. And one day her neighbors, who are her best friends, they're 2 orcs, and they enter her into this baking showdown, and she doesn't know that she's been entered. So when this guy Theo shows up, and he's an elf, he helps her sell all her produce, and he says, look, if you sell out by lunchtime, you've got to come with me to the baking showdown. And she's very reluctant. She keeps denying him. She keeps denying every possibility presented by her friends as well. And it was just exhausting to read about, because I can understand a little bit of anxiety, but it felt like this character was deliberately putting herself down in order to make the plot happen and to make these characters around her persist, and that made it tiring to read. There was also moments in here that when she was on the road with Theo, he would go out of his way to accommodate for her and pay for things and just do things and favors, and they don't know each other, they're strangers. So the fact that he was extra accommodating made me suspicious of him. But it's just a cozy fantasy book where characters are naturally nice and genuine usually, and I thought, it feels like it's overcorrecting in the genuineness and it's making me suspicious, and that's not the point of his character. So it was just frustrating to read, and there was also a lack of intimacy as well. The writing style did not feel evocative enough for me to like it either, and I say lack of intimacy because it felt like Arletta was supposed to be, you know, best friends with her neighbors, and it just felt like a very surface level interaction. Maybe it was the way Arletta was framed as a character because she was pushing things away from herself all the time. And then with Theo, there was a bit of an attraction there, and she acknowledged that, and he also like blushed at particular interactions as well. And I thought, what grounding do these characters have to actually be attracted to each other? They've known each other 24 hours or less, and they don't have any form of trust yet built between them. So it was just not pulling things off for me. And like I said, I ended up DNFing this one, which was unfortunate. And that DNF is unfortunate because it's the last book I addressed in May. And I don't want to end this video on such a negative because I had so many negative books or reactions in this video, and I don't want that to be the way I think of my reading. So I've actually started 2 books and I don't have enough context for them yet to tell you much about them, but I know that I'm liking them and they will both be at least 4 stars. So big hurrah for my June TBR. Go and check it out if you haven't yet. But the one that I've started on audio is The Incandescent, and this is a dark academia story following Dr. Walden. She is one of the teachers that runs this school, and she's responsible for the well-being of 600 students. And these students are also at a magical boarding school, and they learn the art of demons and demonology and how to summon them. So she is an expert in that field, and she has to make sure that demons don't break through and destroy her students and tempt them into the other side and destroy the school and that kind of thing. So I really like this so far, and I think it's got a fantastic writing style, and I'm really looking forward to reading more of it. So this has been a great dark academia win for me. After reading some fantasy and cozy fantasy, I'm happy that I pivoted to this. And then I also have another book, and that is The Raven Scholar, and this is a high epic fantasy. It's going to follow a trial to replace the new emperor because he's served his term of 24 years, and now there are characters from each faction of this world to come and compete for the spot of emperor. And it's very much through the lens of this side character that we're introduced to at the beginning, and she is the scholar who is part of the Raven House. So that's why it's called The Raven Scholar, because it's following her and that's her background. And I'm just really looking forward to reading more of this. She also at the beginning of the story chose her career over a relationship, and I'm also interested to see how that decision makes manifest through the story, because she made that choice. A few preliminary things happened. One character got exiled and she had to write up the notice of exile, and then it's 8 years later, so you don't know what happened with the character's exile because we follow her at the beginning, named Yana, and she's a very fantastically intelligent character, and I was like, oh, why did you set her up at the start and then maybe kill her off? But it didn't happen on page. So part of me is convinced that it will continue with Yana at some point, maybe under a different name. I'm interested to find out because she is linked to a traitor and politics. And so it's already got such a great political angle, and it already feels like it's fully formed in terms of beginning the world building and beginning the intent. And now I'm just looking forward to getting to all of the characters who are in the trial, and there's going to be a murder mystery at some point. I don't know who's going to die and I don't know how. I'm just looking forward to reading more of this. Yes, it's a big book, but it's going to be such a good time. So that is the note that I wanted to end this video on. But if you've DNF'd any books, let me know in the comments so I don't feel so alone, because May was a bit of a fraught month. But thank you so much for watching this video. I have a bunch of videos and vlogs that I will link down below for you for further watching if you are interested. But again, thank you for watching this one. I will come chat to you down below, and I'll see you in my next video. Like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed. Bye.